Hello, 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 everybody. Thank you so much for joining. I'm Brett Walter. I'm the CEO of Climate Action Now, the creator of the Climate Action Now app. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is the highlight of my week when we have an action party, when I come together with fantastic people like you who not only talk about the problem, but do something about it. As many of you know, thumbs up back at you, Rick. As many of you know, the whole point of an action party is to turn knowledge into action. And we do that with the Climate Action Now app. Since we launched the app on Earth Day 2021, thousands of users have taken over 1.3 million actions, including sending nearly 1.1 million messages to political and business leaders demanding action on climate. So while we're waiting for a few more folks to join us, I'd like to get you started with the action part of the action party, and give me a moment to share my screen. And voila. Okay, what you are seeing is what we call our goal tracker. And as we take actions on the app, this number here will increment. And this little QR code over here, well, let me just explain. In advance of this event, Climate Action Now and Citizens Climate Lobby prepared nearly 300 messages that you all can send to political and business leaders advocating for laws and policies that can have the greatest potential to mitigate global warming, according to the En-ROADS model that Ellie, our speaker, is going to be talking to us about today. To access those actions that we prepared for you, all you have to do is take your phone and point it at that QR code as if you were going to take a picture of it, but don't take a picture of it. Just point your camera at the QR code. And when you do that, a little message will pop up on your phone that you can touch to go directly to the messages we've prepared in the Climate Action Now app. How cool is that? I love QR codes. That's the nerd in me talking. I'm sorry, folks, but I just think QR codes are so cool. Now, if you haven't yet installed the app, not to worry, the QR code will take you to your app store where you can then download the app and create an account. And then once you create an account, the app will take you to the actions we created for today. Now, if you have any difficulty, don't sweat it. A Climate Action Now staffer will be available at the end of this event to help you sort through any problems. And the actions are now permanently in the CAN app for you to take whenever you want. And I just want to show you how you can get back to them on your own when you don't have access to the QR code. So let me stop sharing the goal tracker for a moment and share with you my phone screen. Okay, here's my phone screen. Many of you familiar with our action carousel. One feature some of you may have missed, in the upper right corner, there's a campaigns button. You touch that, and here are campaigns. And you just want to scroll down to the politics and policy section and press from En-ROADS to action. And there you are. Here are all the actions that we prepared for you to take today and tomorrow and whenever you want, because they are now permanently in the app. I will stop sharing that, and I would like to, at this moment, then take a second to introduce the moderator for today's action party, Dana Nusatelli with Citizens Climate Lobby. And boy, I should have said at the outset of this event is being co-sponsored by Climate Action Now and Citizens Climate Lobby. Both organizations have been working really hard to put this together for you. Dana is an award-winning environmental scientist and climate journalist with a master's degree in physics. He has written about climate change since 2010 for Skeptical Science, yay, and for The Guardian, yay, from 2013 to 2018, and since 2018 for Yale Climate Connections, yay. In 2015, he published the book Climatology versus Pseudoscience. and he has authored 10 peer-reviewed climate studies, including a 2013 paper that found a 99.7% consensus among peer-reviewed climate science research that showed, spoiler alert, humans are the primary cause of global change. Who knew? So Dana, over to you.
All right, thanks, Brett, for the nice intro. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. As Brett said, I'm just here to moderate questions for Ellie. So as questions pop in your head, please type them into the chat and I will try to track them and then ask them to Ellie when the time comes. But we're really here mostly to watch the Ellie show. So Ellie Johnston leads Climate Interactive's global climate and energy efforts. She's built up Climate Interactive's engagement programs to extend to thousands worldwide, from top journalists to leading decision makers to school children. Through the design of the En-ROADS and C-ROAD simulators and the array of experiences that are used with the tools, Ellie's pioneered approaches to bridging the gap between science and policy. Ellie's been a speaker at UN meetings, the White House, the African Union, and many universities, and her work has been cited in publications like the New York Times, Associated Press, and Washington Post. So she's going to give us a little presentation using En-ROADS of some of the most effective climate solutions. So looking forward to seeing that. And Ellie, it's all yours.
Awesome. Thanks so much for the introduction, Dana. And it's so good to see all of you. I recognize a few faces and names out there. And it's good to be connected to those of you who I don't recognize and maybe aren't familiar with En-ROADS. Before I get started, though, I'm just curious, show of a little raise a hand gesture. Have you heard of En-ROADS? Have you checked it out? Have you used it? Let's just see the kind of familiarity we have in the audience today. All right. Yeah, I see a number of people, looks like about a third of the audience saying, yes, I've heard of En-ROADS before and used it. That's awesome. And you can put your hands down now. I'm gonna try and have this be as interactive as I can, though. So do be ready to respond in different ways. And of course, as Dana mentioned, if we're going along and you have a question or just a thought, the chat is open. Engage with your fellow participants, and we'll try and Dana will keep an eye on it and bump any questions that come up to me, and I'll try and respond. Also, before we get started, since there are so many of you all who are very familiar with En-ROADS, I'm also just want to let you all know that we sit at a very exciting point for the team at Climate Interactive. We are on the eve of releasing a brand new update to En-ROADS, and I'm going to show you all and use that update today. So you all will get to see the very cutting edge. It may or may not go live during this hour. I know our software developer is working behind the scenes to get all the different checks in place so that our release is here. It is June 1st already in Europe and Asia and beyond. So that's when this big launch occurs. So that is really exciting for those of you who are familiar with En-ROADS. If you're new to En-ROADS, that's totally okay. I'm going to start with the basics, and we'll show you how we can use this tool, which is a simulator of global climate action solutions, to explore what it takes. We hear so much about all of the different varieties of types of actions that we can take, and there's lots of debate about what makes the most difference, what should we do, what shouldn't we do, where do we put our priorities, and sometimes it can all be a bit mind-numbing. What we do with En-ROADS is try to synthesize the best available science. We work in close partnership with the MIT Sloan Sustainability Institute. So that's out of the Sloan School of Management up at MIT. And they work with us to make sure that we're helping to sift through that science and the peer-reviewed literature to pick the different kinds of studies and resources and data sources that we want to utilize within the model that we have built. And I'll show it to you in just a second. And then with that tool, we've designed an interface through which people like you, many of those of you on this call know it well, can then share the tool with others and engage people in conversations about what it takes to address climate change, and engage them in a way that's grounded in the science, that kind of doesn't leave that kind of speculation of, oh, did I get that right? Is that the thing is that how it works? You can use the simulator and just play with it and explore through that way. So I guess, well, actually, before I show you the simulator, I'm going to ask you to use, this is going to be a tech heavy webinar. So get ready. We're going to ask you to do, you've already got your app loaded, so you can pull that up. But I'm going to ask you to check out the website Poll Everywhere. And let me activate it. And then I'm going to pull, you go to, let's see. Let me grab the response links. I'm going to drop it in the chat and go to, that's not the correct link. Poll EV Climate Inter 935. You go there, you will see a poll question. And the question, let me share my screen, and so that way you all can see it, is what would you be most excited to see implemented this year in terms of types of climate action? Read through the list here. We have greater investment in renewable energy, more trees planted. Think about what would you be most excited about. I would guess maybe you'd be excited about all of this, or maybe 2/3 of it at least. But pick among the things that you would be most excited to see implemented. And we'll use that as a jumping off point for which to build ourselves a scenario for a possible climate future in which we are addressing climate change more than we are today. All right, so naturally with an event co-hosted by Citizens Climate Lobby, we have a lot of fans of a carbon price there in the mix. So I'm not surprised to see 59% of you all voting for that as the top result. I'm just going to jot down that and some of these other top results that are coming in. Okay, so carbon price. Then I also see just a reduced reliance and use of oil coming in, 20% oil reduction. And then there at row F, we have reduction in methane and other emissions through improved agricultural waste and industry processes. Yeah, we hear a lot about methane as well as the other emissions. And when we say other emissions here, we're talking about things that are not carbon dioxide. So that means nitrous oxide and the F gases like our hydrofluorocarbons, methane and other. All right, excellent. And then down there in fourth place, just ban coal. All right, that'll get us started. Thanks everyone for that. Let me stop sharing and then I'm going to share my screen again. And we will pull up En-ROADS. And like I said, I'm going to be showing you all the new versions. So if you're familiar with En-ROADS, you will notice some differences. And I don't have time. I want to show you all the cool new features that we have in this version, but I'm not going to do it. And if you are interested in going deeper into this, please just join one of our 3 webinars we're running as Climate Interactive tomorrow. We have them happening at 7 a.m., 2 p.m., and 7 p.m. Eastern. So all Eastern time zones, but you do the math, you can figure it out in terms of the time zone that works best for you, whether you're a morning person or if you're not, you can find a time. And here, I'm just gonna, I'll share the link to that too. If you're interested in learning more about this new version I'm showing you of En-ROADS, going into some of the science, some of all the new features, make sure to sign up in that link I just posted in the chat for our webinars this is the release webinars that will tell you all about what's new, what's going on. We have the main thing you may notice is that the temperature outcome in 2100 used to be 3.6. This is the old version. Now it's 3.3. And I will start. So what we are looking at here is the simulator. Like I said, we can test all these different types of actions, and the actions that you all just put into the poll, I'm going to add in just a minute. But just to orient you to the interface, if you're new to En-ROADS, is on the left, we have global sources of primary energy. So this is an energy mix for the world. At the bottom, you see coal, then oil, gas, renewable energy, and pink, we have bioenergy, and then the thin blue line at the top is nuclear. This is from the year 2000 all the way out to 2100. The sources of these types of energy that produce greenhouse gases, namely coal, oil, gas, also bioenergy, produce carbon dioxide emissions, and that results in an increase in greenhouse gas net emissions, in addition to the other sources of greenhouse gases, like coming from our agricultural system, food systems, and from deforestation and other kinds of land use change. That leads to greenhouse gases growing across the century as we have increased economic growth and increased population, these emissions are rising. And yet we're taking action. Fortunately, the world is already taking some action, but we know it's insufficient given the scale of the challenge that we face today with the climate crisis and the impacts that are escalating and building year after year after year, and are predicted to build even further in the coming years without further action. So what we can do here is we can test any of these different actions. And the very first thing you all said, overwhelmingly, you want to see, you would be most excited about seeing to be implemented this year would be a carbon price. So we have that down here, and we can set the carbon price to be any specific level. I will note that one of the new things that we have in En-ROADS is now that the default includes, so our baseline scenario includes a very low level carbon price at $5 per ton of CO2. This is the result of the fact that there are carbon prices worldwide. We do have some. Many economies are already covered by a carbon price. And we know that most of those economies that are covered by a carbon price have a very low carbon price, and it is not sufficient to the scale of the level of action that we need. So, but nonetheless, here it is, $5 per ton of CO2 is kind of that globally averaged dollar per ton amount that we have for a carbon price. Now, I'm going to say, what if we scale that up and we make it much larger than it is today? I'm just going to say we set it at $100 per ton of CO2. This is very roughly like adding $1 to a gallon of gasoline in terms of like how much this could tax certain energy sources. So if we set it at 100, then think to yourself, okay, the temperature outcome in 2100 is at 3.3 degrees. Where do you think that carbon price set to $100 per ton of CO2 might lead us? Do you think it's $100 per ton of CO2 would be sufficient to get us all the way down below 2 degrees? Maybe it gets us below 3 degrees. Think to yourself, or write it into the chat if you want, where you think that'll get it. And then I'm going to hit enter, and we're going to see the simulator run, and we'll see what that result is in terms. Okay, so I'll just count down so you can mentally simulate. 3, 2, 1. All right, so $100 per ton CO2. You saw that made a very substantial impact. So let me just replay that change in case you missed that. So we went from 3.3 degrees down to 2.7 degrees with that $100 per ton carbon price. As a result of that, you notice over here in our left graph of global sources of primary energy, the big thing that happens is coal use. which was kind of flat before, kind of maybe going up a little bit, is now peaks here in 2023 and comes down and then stays down throughout the century. Also, we see gas coming down and oil to some extent too. And as a result, renewable energy grows because renewable energy doesn't face that carbon price that the sources, those fossil fuels that produce carbon dioxide emissions do face. And so their prices go up while renewable energy stays where it was before and makes it much more cost competitive relative to the fossil fuels. As a result, you see net greenhouse gas emissions, instead of rising steadily throughout the century and kind of plateauing, they peak and then they come down and they sort of level off. And you can see why here on the left graph, why our emissions aren't going down as a result, because we still have some fossil fuel use in the mix. And also we've really, the carbon price is impacting our sources of energy. It's not touching those other areas like methane, like our deforestation. And one of the other things I'll note here as we're looking at this, and if you're wondering, why didn't this red area for oil come down more with a carbon price? And maybe some of you all know the answer to this already, but one of the reasons is that oil is a commodity that is just very expensive by its nature. We are stuck using oil. When you have an internal combustion engine car, you can't just like switch to another fuel just because oil is one day expensive. You have to get a whole new car to do that. And that takes time. And so oil has this kind of persistence through our economy if we just raise prices. And we know throughout history, oil prices go up, they go down by large magnitudes. You know, we go from the price of a barrel of oil being, you know, less than $40 to well over 100 in, you know, just a few years span. And so that kind of, those fluctuations make it more resilient than other types of fossil fuels to these price increases. And also, you know, when we think about coal, we think about gas use, there are clean alternatives, and that's where renewables come in, because we use those coal and gas in electricity production. And well, there is when you can also use renewable energy for electricity production. So there are nice alternatives to be able to switch to and enable that fuel switching. So here we are, just by one action, we lowered temperature by 0.6 degrees. Wow. So then the next thing you all suggested was oil reduction. So I was just talking about oil. Let's go back to it and let's just say, well, we have oil. Let's address it specifically, because the carbon price did lower it some, but let's take even more action on oil. And so here, I'm just gonna tax it. So what this is I'm just gonna say, what if we have we very highly tax oil? So I'll refresh the change, and you see that pushes down oil use some, which further pushes down emissions and pushes down the temperature even more. Overall, oil is now quite expensive, and we can see that. We go to a different graph, we look here at our fuel production cost by source. And you see here, this is just showing our fuels, coal, oil up here at the top, gas in blue at the bottom, and then also bioenergy, which we can use as biofuels, ethanol, that kind of thing. And you see with the carbon price, we have really increased the price of coal as well as gas somewhat. Gas is not as carbon intensive as coal, so although the carbon price does hit it, it doesn't impact it as much. And then oil, with the kind of the double whammy that we have of the carbon price plus the tax, has made it very, very expensive. And yet we still see some oil use happening. Part of that is because, yeah, there's not alternatives out there until we do something about them. That's where maybe we could look over there towards transport, electrification, and things like that to help accelerate those options and the switching from oil to other options. All right, so that gets us to 2.6 degrees. The next thing that you all mentioned, which was very astute among the options, was methane and other gases. Okay, so we have here the ability to lower the emissions from methane, nitrous oxide, and the F gases. So methane shows up in, and you guys, many of you probably know this, methane shows this up in a few different places throughout our society. One is in natural gas production. Natural gas is like 97% methane. It's just a gas. It's the gas that makes up natural gas. That's why it's often called methane gas instead of natural gas, which is kind of a misnomer, of course. And then methane also appears in agricultural practices. So cows, very famous for their production of methane, unfortunately, as well as things like that we don't hear so much about, like rice paddies. Anywhere where you have agriculture, and there's a lot of like organic matter decomposition happening. Rice paddies are very wet, swampy bogs. There's going to be methane released. That's just part of biology. And then you also have, similarly, because there's decomposition happening, methane occurs in waste. So when we have waste in our food system, waste in our landfills, industrial waste, all those different kinds of things are sources of methane emissions. Then the other two greenhouse gases I mentioned, nitrous oxide and the F gases. Nitrous oxide, that shows up in the use of industrial fertilizers in our agricultural system. So you'll see that's where our nitrous oxide emissions come from. Let me switch this graph over here and we can take a look at these different types of gases that we have. So I was just talking about methane, that's here in light blue. Now, then we have in purple our nitrous oxide, and then the F gases. The F gases are here in gold. F gases include things like SF6, our hydrofluorocarbons, things that show up in different kinds of industry. So our hydrofluorocarbons, they appear in things like our air conditioners, refrigeration systems, like walk-in freezers. They can be sources of hydrofluorocarbons. There's a big global agreement to address that, and we need to see it implemented. So in terms of thinking about actions, we got to make sure that we are taking action to implement the Kigali Amendment of the Montreal Protocol. That's an agreement that says we need to reduce our hydrofluorocarbon emissions. And then we also have F-gas emissions in like the semiconductor industry. So making the microprocessor chips that keep our phones running and everything else, it seems like these days going, is also can be a source of F-gas emissions if those industries are not careful in those emissions. So this slider here moves all of those things together. So I'm just gonna move it down in one swoop and we'll see what kind of impact that makes. All right, so we were at, previously we were at, now mess it up. Anyways, previously we were at 2.6, now we're at 2.2. So you see that has a significant impact. And you can really see that play out here in this right graph that I'm showing here, where you see as we take action to reduce those emissions, this wedge here gets much more narrow across all of these different types of arenas. And there's a whole suite of different actions that we need to take in industries, the governments need to implement, the communities need to think about as they adopt different kinds of products that can help address these methane and other gases. So it's not just one policy that will be able to sufficiently address them. It's a lot of different things. And here, I'll go into the advanced view and you'll see some of the different ways in which we can take action. So, and this is where too, people who are familiar with En-ROADS may see some differences. So we have this use detailed settings with function. And instead of taking action just on all of those gases all in one mass, we could say, well, what if we adopt the best agricultural practices such that we can reduce methane emissions and our nitrous oxide emissions? Or what if we adopt best practices in our in energy and industry? Things like if we're gonna produce natural gas, let's ban all flaring, because a lot of times and even this occurs too in drilling for oil, where natural gas is oftentimes a byproduct. They'll just light the extra gas on fire and just flare it off as a way to get rid of it. But that then sends a ton of greenhouse gases up into the atmosphere. What if that was banned and instead they had to do something with that gas, keep it out of the atmosphere? Things like that, adoption of energy and industry best practices. So you can see we have and then you can also just, if you want to address the F gases, those hydrofluorocarbons I was talking about specifically, you can phase those out in a specific year. So this gives you some finer controls if you want to explore for yourself. And here, I'll just drop the scenario link of what we have so far into the chat, if you're the kind of person who likes to play along and pull this up in your own browser and try to explore some of these different options that we have here. But I'll just keep the main slider we have set, and we're at 2.2 degrees, which is good news because we don't have a lot of time today to create ourselves a scenario. So you all have really zeroed in on some top types of action. And I'm just going to go to the next one we have, which was to ban coal. And let's see, it does a ban on coal get us to 2 degrees? And then can we go from there? And we've taken some pretty big actions so far. And I'm very curious, can we just do it in four sliders here? So one way we have the tax. That's what I did with oil. We were just reducing our oil use. But with coal, the option said ban coal. So I'm going to go into the advanced settings here. I'm going to scroll down, and we have this slider that says reduce new coal infrastructure. So this is banning all new coal infrastructure. And then down here, we also have percent reduction in coal utilization. So this is saying of all the coal power plants out there, we're just going to shut them down. And we're going to say we're going to reduce the use of them. So there's kind of two ways that we can, and then of course we can just accelerate the retirement of coal-fired power plants. I'm going to do it, I think, by just reducing new coal infrastructure. So what if we put a ban on all new coal infrastructure? Let's see where that would lead us in terms of, and one thing you note too here, you see coal primary energy demand came down with our carbon price, and then it kind of kicked back up. Some of you may be wondering what's going on there. You can see it here in this graph too. Some of that is just because the economy keeps growing and there continues to be demand for different types of energy sources, and coal is one of them. And also, let's see, is it? And oh, here we go. The other thing is that you see carbon capture and storage technology, which the carbon price incentivizes here within En-ROADS, gets that technology eventually catches up and is doing some work to capture those carbon emissions from coal. So even though we see the coal rising some, the emissions from about half of it are being captured. So that's one interesting dynamic there. But coal still, even if we have carbon capture and storage technology, which as we know is very expensive, and we've faced decades of just limitations and the technology not delivering as much as we would like. And also, I live in Asheville, North Carolina, here in the southern Appalachian Mountains of the United States. We are not in coal country, but coal country is nearby. And it is heartbreaking, the devastation that coal mining has in communities to the north of us. So reducing coal infrastructure can also reduce that extraction of coal too. So I'm going to just say, what if we had 100% reduction, no new coal infrastructure? So you can see here that coal really peaks and then just phases out throughout the century because those power plants, which on average have a lifetime of about 30 years, are now winding down. And some of them lasted very, very long, but the majority of them, after about 2050 or so, have been phased out. So that gets us to 2.1 degrees, very close to our the goal of staying below 2 degrees. Of course, in the Paris Climate Agreement and across the world, our goal is to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. Well below 2 degrees is what it says within the Paris Agreement. So 2.1 gets us darn close, but not close enough. But you see, we have created a much better world than what we have so far. I'm going to pause here because I've said a lot. I've moved pretty quickly and we don't have a ton of time today. And I want to make sure I get to some of your questions that might have come up and be able to answer those. And then if we have time, maybe we can push it all the way down below 2. I bet some of you all have some ideas for areas where we might take additional action in addition to these 4 right here. I'll post the scenario link back into the chat. Oh, wait. I can't share this scenario link with you all. You all probably noticed that. It doesn't work because I'm showing you all the secret version of En-ROADS that hasn't been released yet. Sorry about that, but it will be soon. And I have this have it up in the other tab. I'm just waiting to hit refresh and we'll see it lowering down from 3.6 to 3.3. Sorry about that.
Ellie, if I may interrupt you, I'd like to just take a moment to share some really interesting news with all of you. While Ellie has been talking, we have twice met and exceeded our goals. We got to 400 actions almost within 5 minutes of getting started. I bumped it up to 750. We hit that goal, and now I've just bumped it up to 1,000. And so is that all visible on everybody's screen? Thumbs up, Francis, if I got that spotlighted. Yeah, so let's keep going. You're doing amazing stuff. I didn't want to interrupt Ellie because it was such a fascinating presentation. But at this point, as we go into Q&A, wanted to make sure you all have the app and are taking the actions that we've got set up for you today. So sorry for the interruption, Ellie.
No problem. Yeah, and that's great to hear. Keep at it. Keep pulling up those different types of actions. And hopefully this has sparked some ideas for you as to areas where we might take further action. Areas that, there's so much we need to do on climate, and we put a lot of emphasis on some of those top areas for very good reason. But when it comes to your community, your municipality, your state, there may be areas where the political gridlock, for example, is not as intractable, and we might be able to find paths towards action that we didn't necessarily foresee by taking action on something like methane and other gases, or other areas. And also, hopefully, we can too see where the priorities are. Making fossil fuels more expensive through a carbon price really made a big difference in the scenario we have so far. Dana, I'm going to put it over to you. You've been watching the chat. What do you see over there? Any good questions that have come up? You want to throw my way?
Yeah, there are good questions. I'm going to abuse my power here and ask my own question first, because I can. So you mentioned that between your new version and your old version of En-ROADS, the baseline, the business as usual, dropped from 3.6 to 3.3 degrees by 2100. A lot of the projections I've seen tend to be more closer to like 2.7 degrees from like Climate Action Tracker, for example. There's a big range there. But like, do you have kind of an explanation as to why yours is a little more pessimistic?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so let me pull up. Here's where we started at. I have a lot of tabs here. Okay, so this is what En-ROADS looks like today. If you go to this website, it works. It, like I said, at any moment, we'll update it and it will change. But we have updated it to 3.3 degrees. And the baseline scenario in En-ROADS, what we intend the baseline scenario to be, which is different than what others use as their there are different terms that different organizations and modeling teams use. And to some degree, they have different purposes. So whenever kind of comparing these different scenarios, baseline scenarios, business as usual, whatever it is, it's important to understand like, what are they trying to do here? For En-ROADS, it's we're trying to create a scenario in which that reflects the actions that we have seen taken so far around the world. And so we're looking at trends in terms of costs for renewable energies, and these trends are the result of policies, subsidies for renewable energy and different types of legislation that has been passed around the world. And we're looking to what has happened and then saying like, okay, what if that continues? We don't necessarily forecast or suggest that the policies are going to keep growing. That's where we get to test it in all of these different kinds of sliders below. We're not doing the baseline scenario of En-ROADS that results in 3.3 isn't like we haven't done like an analysis of the NDCs, for example, the pledges that countries have made to the United Nations, like Climate Action Tracker might use, and they might say, oh, well, when we look at all the NDCs, this is what the temperature result is. Other groups have, like for example, one of the groups that we look to quite oftentimes in comparing our results is the International Energy Agency. So the IEA, they have what's called the stated policies scenario. So this is like the policies that exist, not the targets and the lofty net zero goals that have been set, but what are those stated policies on the books? And they've created a scenario to that. We compare a lot to the IEA's stated policy scenario. We, in this new version of En-ROADS, we're also comparing to a set of scenarios that the IPCC has been using recently in their 6th assessment report, AR6, that were developed by a group called NGFS. And that is the Network for Greening the Financial System, I believe is what that acronym stands for. And this is a set of scenarios that we think most accurately and closely reflects kind of what we're trying to do with the baseline of En-ROADS. And if you join our webinars tomorrow, you will see our director, Drew Jones, go into more in depth into some of the comparisons between this baseline of En-ROADS and those other scenarios out there. So we've got a lot of documentation to go even more into that. If it was live, I could share the links with you, but I can't. They'll be there tomorrow. And the other thing I will say, because some of you all might be wondering as well, is, okay, so what happened? You all were saying 3.6, and now you're saying 3.3? What's going on with that 0.3 degree temperature drop? Like, we could see there's some differences, but the main difference, and I haven't mentioned this yet, the main difference for why this temperature is lower is that we have included the assumption that that climate change hurts the economy. This is known as the economic damage function. So that when temperatures rise, economic growth is going to be hurt. Now, intuitively, you all might be saying, well, yeah, of course, like we know this, like storms, droughts, these things, they hurt our economy. But from a modeling perspective, we didn't, it's very tricky to be able to put a precise kind of quantify what that amount of damage is. And we finally decided, we don't know exactly what it is, but we're going to pick an estimate. So we looked at a whole range of different studies. So this graph here shows a variety of studies that show at different temperature levels, what is the reduction in economic growth as a result of temperature change? And we said, well, we'll just go with this one that is somewhat in the middle. It's not no damage, but it's not the highest amount of damage. And then as a result, our economic growth for the world, so if we look at gross world product, is now lower than what it would be. So this dotted line you're looking at here, and I realize it might be getting a little technical here, but this dotted line is what our economic growth would be if we didn't have any damage, if temperature change did not impact the economy, then our economy would be growing much more. But because we have included that here within this scenario of En-ROADS, it leads to lower economic growth, which then as a result leads to lower temperature change, because when there's lower economic growth, there's lower energy demand, less energy consumption, and that results in less greenhouse gas emissions. So it's this kind of complex dynamic that is so important and is not zero. We know that. And we have finally added this to En-ROADS, and we hope that it inspires other modelers to factor it into their models as well, because we haven't seen it appear too much so far. So that's some of it. I went in kind of deep there. Yeah, jump in.
You know, for just a second, we have blown past our goal of 1,000 actions. So Brett, if you would please increase the goal.
I will gladly do so. Thank you.
Well, so that one actually segues into another question from George, who wondered how you decide when it's time for an En-ROADS update.
Yeah, well, typically it's now, we have been working very hard on a bunch of different, this big update that we've been making, that we're making with this new version here. So we haven't had a lot of updates recently, but generally we try and be on a monthly update cycle where we add new features. You know, the International Agency comes out with a new World Energy Outlook, IPCC comes out with a new report, the latest carbon dioxide data comes out for the previous year, and we keep factoring that all into En-ROADS, and we're running checks and calibrating and running comparisons to see what makes a difference and what doesn't, you know, and where we need to update things. So, you know, you see that carbon price, you know, for example, is like, that was one of those things where we realized that, oh, well, when we built En-ROADS years ago and when we first released it, we didn't have so many carbon price policies implemented around the world. Now we do. Let's factor that into the default and make an update as a result. So there's a lot of reasons why we update it. A lot of times too, we just want to provide new features because people like you have requested it and said, hey, you know, I'm hearing a lot about X or Y solution, and I really just want to understand what kind of difference does that make? So for example, on our short list, now that we're done with this big package of updates, we'll move on to things like hydrogen, which we know we're hearing a lot about. The Inflation Reduction Act puts a ton of money into hydrogen. Where does this fit into this mix of actions? And how should we be thinking about it? Is this a great solution, or are there questions around it that we need to figure out? So we want to get to the bottom of that, and those are one of those things that we'll move on to next now that we've done some updates here.
Cool. And Lindy asked, have you noticed any interesting emergent properties in the model that you or your team weren't expecting?
Oh, that's a great question. Let me think about that. It is hard for me to say because I spend so much time looking at this, where the surprises were. I would love to hear from you all what you see as surprising, because I feel like I live and breathe this tool so much that it's hard to get distance from it sometimes to learn about some of the dynamics. But here's one thing that this new update enabled us to dig a lot deeper into was around land use. So you see here, even in this scenario that we've built here, we didn't touch land use CO2 emissions. You see it goes up and comes down. We have now done a lot of modeling to capture how land shifts across different things and the implications that then has for greenhouse gas emissions. So we have deforestation here. So deforestation, it is where it is. Hopefully then it comes down throughout the century. One of the big things that I have learned recently, as we have been developing this new package of modeling updates, is and for some people, you may already know this, but is the deep inherent link between deforestation and our food systems. So much so that we have added new food sliders in En-ROADS, and we have them tucked here under deforestation. So you'll now see food from animals and food waste. And for me, as somebody who's a climate person, I had always thought about, we think about vegetarian diets and that kind of thing, and we think about methane. Oh, the cows. Oh, let's shift away from so much cow production, and that'll have this big climate impact. But in addition to that, I mean, that's not insignificant by itself. But in addition to that, our demand for cropland is what drives deforestation. It's not, and this is speaking from the global level. Again, here I live in the southeastern United States. I see a lot of forest impacts, and that comes from bioenergy and other kinds of like timber and paper production and that kind of thing. But in the vast majority of the world where deforestation is occurring, that is a result of people needing land to grow things. And sometimes that's at an industrial scale, sometimes that's at a small scale. So when we do something like, what if we said we reduce the amount of food that comes from animals in our diet? So instead of it being about a third of our diet, what if we'd reduce it dramatically? And you see here the substantial impact that has in reducing deforestation much quicker, because what's happening is we don't need to continue sourcing more land to meet the food demands of the world if we can live on a smaller footprint. So that's one thing that's been really sitting with me lately, is just that connection between our food choices and how that impacts forests worldwide. And you see too that has a temperature impact, of course, that gets us down to 2 degrees.
So you mentioned methane there, and Tom was wondering if the model considers natural methane sources like thawing permafrost in the Arctic, or if it's just human sources of methane.
Yeah, it's that's factored into. Well, I will say we have that as a assumption. So we can go under land, carbon, and methane cycles. And you see here effective temperature on methane respiration rates. So how much methane is released as global temperatures get higher and higher. And so these are some of the things that we have. And you see their temperature threshold for permafrost as well. At what temperature threshold do we start to see that release of methane from the permafrost? As well, one of the graphs that we can look at here too is methane emissions by source. Now this is focused mostly, this graph is focused entirely on those human sources of methane from our energy production, agriculture, waste, as well. So that gives you a picture too of where some of those methane emissions are coming from that I mentioned earlier.
Cool, thanks. Bruce is wondering if you've run the case if the Inflation Reduction Act is successful. Oh, that's a domestic policy. So that gets to a question I had, which is there any chance of that you guys will make a US domestic version of En-ROADS?
Yeah, it would be awesome to have one. And we just need a lot of funding to do it. This En-ROADS is the product of decades of work. And our team works really hard on this one tool. And right now we're trying to use it to make as much difference as we can with this. And we see a lot of conversations that can be had, even with the global context that this simulator provides, to give insight into things that are more national or local in nature. Or we also use this a lot in businesses too, as a way to build business understanding and employee understanding of how a company might be able to take action on climate change. So when it comes to the Inflation Reduction Act, we have thought about different ways in which we might capture that. But I will say, like, now that we have this kind of updated baseline, is we're not zeroing in on the Inflation Reduction Act, but we're looking at the aggregate effect of policies like the Inflation Reduction Act worldwide. So here in the US, we have the IRA, EU has their policies, China has N+1, or it's not N+, maybe it is N+1. you all might know better than I. But they have their policies where they're taking action, and we're looking for those signals. You know, how old is the Inflation Rate? It's not even a year old yet. And we want to see, but I did see there was an op-ed actually in today's New York Times, I believe, that says that they're already starting to see signs that the policy is driving increased purchasing of renewable energy. So that's where we could boost renewables, and we could test out some of the different policies that are factored into the Inflation Reduction Act and said, what if the whole world did that? And what if they did that even better? That kind of thing. So there are ways around it. And we do have some previously recorded webinars about inroads in the Inflation Reduction Act that I can dig up and send, or you can look on our YouTube to find.
Thanks. So while we have a couple minutes left, Riva was wondering if you could show us a scenario in which we get to net zero by 2050 and what that would take.
Yeah. Well, let's see. Where are we now? So here we are at greenhouse gas and net emissions. And so one of the things that I always think about when I hear net zero is like, what are we talking about? Net zero greenhouse gases or net zero CO2 emissions? So here we are at net CO2 net emissions. And even that is still pretty high. So, and part of that's because we still have some coal, oil, and gas. And one of the things to note too is that where this kind of net zero globally by 2050 gets us is that's going to push us to a scenario that's closer to 1.5. And one of the ways in which we could do this, maybe if we don't have but 3 minutes left, but I would love it if you all could just throw into the chat some quick ideas about what do you think it's going to take in addition to the policies we have here to get towards 1.5 degrees. Just drop them into the chat really quick. And electrification and energy efficiency. Thanks, Joe. So what if we said we're much more efficient with our energy in our transport sector and much more efficient with it in our buildings and industry? And then what if we switch over to electric vehicles? So we're moving away from all those internal combustion engines, and we're also adopting equipment in our buildings and industry, heat pumps, no more natural gas furnaces or oil furnaces, electric equipments and industrial facilities, that kind of thing. That pushes us down even further. What else do we have? I see solar and wind, a bigger carbon price, revolutions. Yeah, we're gonna need some revolutions to get to this scenario, undoubtedly. I don't have a slider for that, unfortunately, but just think about what it takes to move any of these one sliders, and that's a revolution right there. But we have, let's see, we did address our food from animals. Let's also make sure we tackle food waste. And then we're gonna plant a bunch of trees. And then we're gonna have some technological carbon removal because it's 2023 and we are very, very late in taking the action that we need. And that gets us to 1.5. And you can see, here we are, it's not 2050, but we could keep pushing things. We've hit net zero right here in about 2070 or so. So we could keep ramping things up, higher carbon price I saw and things like that to get us that much further to get to that net zero by 2050. But you really see that it's going to take all of us, and it's going to take so much more action than we have today to get close to these goals that will create a much more livable future than the one we have today. So I see we're reaching the top of the hour, and I want to punt it back to Dana, put it back to Brett, and we can put a pause in it here and go find En-ROADS. Here's the link to the one that's live. Like I said, any moment now, you'll see the updated version, and you can use it to build your own scenario. There it is. It's live. you all can use it now. I told you all that our software developer was working behind the scenes. So you all are at the very cutting edge and now have access to this latest update. Check it out.
Thank you so much, Ellie. A fantastic presentation. And thank you, Dana. I'm just going to jump in here at the last second. I've been so busy taking action and updating the goal tracker, which you guys blew through several times. I'm going to go back and watch the recording. That's one of my announcements that probably within another couple of hours, I will be sending out recordings of the recording of this action party. So for those of you who want to go over it again or to get more instructions on taking action, that will be coming for you. The next thing I'd like to announce is that I don't have a date for you yet, but I'm very excited about our next action party, which we're calling the Dying Green Action Party. And we will be talking with Michael Oshman, who is the executive director of the Green Restaurant Association. This is a very, very cool organization that certifies restaurants and gets them on the path towards greening their operations. And guess what we're going to do during that action party? We'll talk about the impact of the U.S. restaurants, which the U.S. restaurants by themselves, if they were a country, would be something like the 14th largest emitter in the world. We will be carpet bombing the inboxes of CEOs of restaurant chains, asking them to get certified by the Green Restaurant Association. This is going to be the first in a new series of action parties by Climate Action Now with our partners on corporate responsibility. I think many of you have been to our environmental justice action parties. Now we will have action parties on corporate responsibility. And we have also started a new series on nature conservation. So stay tuned to the newsletter and the app for an announcement on that. And then I just want to alert you finally to one milestone that Climate Action Now has just reached. As we've been having this action party, another action party has been taking place at the University of Maryland using the Climate Action Now platform and goal tracker and app. And during the same hour, two climate ambassadors with the Physicians for Social Responsibility have convened an action party with some experts on the impact, the intersection between health and climate. Now, this is a milestone because it illustrates what we as Climate Action Now really aspire to do, which is to enable everyone to have their own action parties. And I just want you to know we can do it. If any of you belong to organizations and you want to have your own action parties, Climate Action Now will provide the platform, the app for free, and we will for free also provide technical assistance and training. So if you are interested in that, you can email me at bwalter@climateactionnow.com, bwalter@climateactionnow.com. And I will start talking to you about that. So Ellie, Dana, thank you so much, for a great presentation, fantastic job. And thank you everybody else for taking action, walking the walk, and being there for the planet. So much. Thank you all for joining us. And I look forward to seeing you at our next action party. Bye-bye. Oh, and I was going to add also that Cooper Walter, our engineer, is staying on the call in the meeting room. And so for any of you who have struggled or had an issue with the app, he can help you if you'll hang around. I know most of you are going to be leaving now, but Cooper will be here to help you. And I'm going to duck into a debriefing with Dana and Ellie, but I'll be back in 5 minutes to also help out for anyone who needs, any technical support. So again, thank you very much, and we'll see you at the next action party.